What if I told you? A woman will never directly say, I'm falling for you, but she will reveal it subtly, consistently, and psychologically. The truth is, attraction isn't loud. It's hidden in the way she speaks, the questions she asks, and the emotions she unconsciously leaks. Most men miss these signs completely, and by the time they realize it, the moment is gone. But if you understand the psychology behind her words, you'll start to notice a pattern, a code. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. So the real question is, are you paying attention to what she's really saying? You've probably experienced this before, that quiet shift in someone's energy where nothing is said directly, yet everything feels different. The conversations linger a little longer, the words carry a little more weight, and suddenly, you find yourself wondering, is this just friendly, or is something deeper unfolding beneath the surface? The truth is, attraction rarely announces itself out loud. It moves in silence, through patterns, through subtle changes in behavior, through words that seem ordinary, but are anything but. And if you don't understand the psychology behind it, you'll miss it completely. Because when a woman begins to develop feelings for you, her mind doesn't flip a switch and make everything obvious. Instead, it starts weaving you into her emotional world in ways even she may not fully realize. She begins to hold on to moments. Conversations you thought were small, she brings them back days later, sometimes in passing, sometimes with a soft smile that suggests they meant more than you noticed. This isn't random. This is her subconscious creating emotional continuity, turning fleeting interactions into something stable, something that feels safe and familiar. In her mind, you're no longer just a person she talks to. You're becoming part of a pattern she wants to keep. And as this pattern forms, something even more subtle begins to happen. She starts testing you, but not in the way most people expect. There are no direct questions like, what are your intentions? Or how do you feel about me? Instead, she frames her thoughts in ways that seem abstract, almost philosophical. She might ask you what you think about trust, about change, about relationships in general. On the surface, it feels like a casual conversation. But underneath, she's studying you. She's listening to how you think, how you respond, how emotionally aware you are. Because before she allows herself to fall deeper, her mind needs to know, are you safe to feel this with? And that's when her language begins to shift. At first, everything is light, effortless, almost careless. But as her feelings grow, you'll notice a quiet transformation. She starts choosing her words more carefully. Sometimes she pauses before replying, not because she doesn't know what to say, but because suddenly, it matters. The way you perceive her starts to carry weight. And without saying it directly, she's telling you that your opinion of her is no longer neutral. It's important. This is where many people get confused because they mistake this subtle seriousness for distance, when in reality, it's the opposite. It's emotional investment taking form. And then, almost without warning, she begins placing you into her future, but never in a way that feels obvious. It might come out as a joke, a hypothetical, or a passing comment. You'd probably enjoy that place. Or, if we ever did something like that. These aren't just words thrown into the air. They're quiet glimpses into how her mind is starting to see you, not just as someone in the present, but as someone who could exist in her tomorrow. It's her way of exploring the idea of us without fully exposing herself to the vulnerability of saying it directly. Because vulnerability for her doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in layers, small pieces of her past, her thoughts, her insecurities, shared gradually, almost cautiously. She's not just opening up, she's observing how you handle what she gives you. Do you listen? Do you understand? Do you make her feel safe or do you dismiss what she reveals? This is one of the most critical psychological moments because every response you give either builds trust or quietly breaks it. And often you won't even realize it's happening. At the same time, something almost invisible begins to shape your interactions. She starts mirroring you, but not in a mechanical way. It's more refined than that. If you're calm, she softens. If you're playful, she becomes more expressive. If you show interest, she doesn't just match it, she amplifies it slightly, as if she's trying to meet you at your level and then take it just a step further. This isn't strategy. It's instinct. Her mind is aligning with yours, trying to create harmony, trying to make the connection feel natural, effortless, real. And this is where the real shift needs to happen, not in her, but in you. Because most people are trained to look for obvious signs, for clear confessions, for direct validation. But real attraction doesn't operate that way. It exists in the space between words, in the tension between what's said and what's felt. If you rely only on what's explicit, you'll always be one step behind. But if you learn to observe, to listen beyond the surface, to understand the psychology of these subtle behaviors, everything changes. You stop chasing clarity and start recognizing patterns. You stop overanalyzing every word and start understanding intention. And most importantly, you stop reacting emotionally to uncertainty and start responding with awareness. Because the truth is, when someone is developing feelings for you, they're not just revealing themselves. They're also watching how you handle the revelation. They're asking without saying it, can you see me without me having to explain myself? And if you can, that's where the connection deepens. Because in the end, It's never about what's said directly. It's about what's felt, understood, and recognized in silence. It rarely comes in the form of a direct question. She won't sit across from you and ask, "Are you emotionally mature?" Or, "Can I trust you with my feelings?" Instead, it shows up in a completely different way, subtle, almost unnoticeable if you're not paying attention. She begins to ask things that feel general, almost philosophical, like she's just thinking out loud. Do you think people really change? Or why do you think relationships fail? And in that moment, most people make the mistake of answering casually, not realizing they're actually being observed on a much deeper level. Because what's really happening here is psychological evaluation. When a woman starts developing feelings, her mind naturally shifts into a protective mode. Emotionally investing in someone always carries risk, and her subconscious knows that. So instead of confronting that risk directly, she filters it through conversation. She creates scenarios where your answers reveal your inner world, your beliefs, your emotional patterns, your stability. She's not just listening to what you say, she's studying how you think. And the key here is subtlety. If she asked you directly about your intentions or your emotional capacity, it would expose her vulnerability too early. It would give away the fact that she's already thinking about you in a deeper way. So instead, she hides the question inside something broader, something that feels safe. But make no mistake, your answer matters more than you realize. Because in her mind, she's connecting dots. If you talk about people never changing, she might wonder if you hold on to past judgments. If you dismiss emotions or avoid depth, she may interpret that as emotional unavailability. And if you respond with awareness, balance, and honesty, something shifts quietly inside her. A sense of safety begins to form, not because of what you said, but because of what your words revealed about who you are. This is where mindset becomes everything. Most people approach these moments with the need to impress. They try to give the perfect answer, the one they think sounds right. But the truth is, authenticity carries far more weight than perfection. She's not looking for rehearsed lines or ideal responses. She's looking for alignment. She wants to feel that your words match your energy, that your perspective feels grounded, real, and emotionally aware. And there's another layer to this that many overlook. It's not just about your answers. It's about your presence while answering. Are you calm? Are you engaged? Do you show curiosity in return? Because communication is never one-sided. While she's evaluating you, she's also feeling the interaction itself. If you respond with depth but no emotional connection, it can feel empty. But if your words carry both meaning and presence, it creates something powerful, a sense that you're not just speaking, you're understanding. At the same time, these indirect tests are not always conscious. She may not even realize she's doing it. It's driven by instinct, by past experiences, by an internal need to protect her emotional space. That's why the way you respond has such a strong impact. You're not just answering a question, you're shaping how safe she feels continuing this connection. And here's where most people fail without even knowing it. They either avoid depth entirely, keeping everything light and surface level, or they overcompensate, trying too hard to appear emotionally intelligent. Both extremes create imbalance. What actually builds attraction is emotional steadiness, the ability to engage in deeper conversations naturally, without forcing them, without turning them into something heavy or unnatural. Because when she feels that steadiness, something inside her relaxes. The need to test begins to fade, replaced by a quiet confidence in you. She no longer feels like she has to figure you out because your consistency is doing that for her. And that's when the dynamic changes, from evaluation to connection. But to reach that point, you have to shift your own mindset. You have to stop seeing conversations as something to win or control and start seeing them as something to experience and understand. Every question, no matter how simple it sounds, carries a layer beneath it. And when you learn to recognize that layer, you stop reacting on autopilot and start responding with intention. Because in the end, it's not about giving the right answers. It's about becoming the kind of person whose answers naturally reflect clarity, emotional awareness, and depth. Someone who doesn't need to prove anything because it's already present in the way they think, speak, and engage. And when she senses that, she doesn't need to test you anymore. At the beginning, everything feels effortless. The words flow without hesitation. The tone is light, almost careless, as if nothing really matters. Conversations happen without pressure, without expectation. It's easy, natural, almost forgettable. But then something shifts. Not dramatically, not in a way that announces itself, but quietly, subtly, in a way you can feel more than you can explain. She starts to slow down. Her responses aren't as instant as before, not because she's losing interest, but because she's becoming more aware, more intentional. There's a pause now, a small space between what she feels and what she chooses to say. And in that space, something important is happening. She's thinking about how her words will be received. She's considering how you might interpret them. And without directly saying it, she's revealing that your perception of her has started to matter. This is where most people misread the situation. They see the delay, the slight change in tone, and assume something is wrong. They think she's pulling away, losing interest, becoming distant. But the truth is often the opposite. What looks like distance is actually emotional investment taking shape. Because when someone starts to care, they stop being careless. Her language begins to carry weight. Simple messages are no longer just messages. They become expressions of how she wants to be seen. She might rewrite a sentence before sending it, remove a word, change the tone, soften something that feels too direct. Not because she's trying to manipulate the conversation, but because she's becoming aware of its impact. Every word now has meaning because it's being filtered through a growing emotional connection. And you can feel it, even if you can't fully explain it. The energy of the conversation changes. There's a subtle tension, not uncomfortable, but present. A sense that something deeper is forming beneath the surface. She might become slightly more reserved at times, not because she has less to say, but because she's choosing her moments more carefully. She's no longer just expressing, she's curating. This is where emotional intelligence becomes critical. Because if you respond to this shift with insecurity, by overanalyzing or questioning her change, you disrupt the very process that's bringing her closer. You turn her awareness into pressure. And pressure is the fastest way to make someone retreat back into emotional safety. But if you understand what's happening, everything changes. You stop reacting to the surface and start recognizing the depth beneath it. You realize that her careful language isn't distance, it's attention. It's a sign that she values the connection enough to think about it, to protect it, to shape it in a way that feels right. And when you meet that energy with calmness, with steadiness, with your own sense of grounded presence, something powerful happens. The interaction becomes balanced. She doesn't feel like she has to overthink everything because your consistency creates a space where she can relax again. Her intentionality doesn't disappear, it softens. It becomes more natural, more fluid, because it's no longer driven by uncertainty. There's also something deeper at play here, something rooted in human psychology. When emotions start to grow, the brain naturally becomes more cautious. It starts evaluating risks, anticipating outcomes, trying to avoid potential rejection or misunderstanding. This is why her language becomes more deliberate. It's not just emotional, it's neurological. Her mind is trying to protect something that now feels valuable. And this is the moment where your mindset determines everything. If you approach this shift with neediness, constantly seeking reassurance or clarity, you amplify her caution. But if you approach it with quiet confidence, allowing the connection to unfold without forcing it, you create safety. And safety is what allows attraction to deepen without resistance. Because real connection doesn't thrive under pressure. It grows in spaces where both people feel understood without having to explain themselves constantly. Where words don't need to be perfect because the intention behind them is already clear. And as her language continues to evolve, you'll notice something else. It's not just what she says, it's how she says it. The tone becomes softer at times, more thoughtful, sometimes even more vulnerable without being obvious. There's a quiet sincerity that wasn't there before, a sense that she's no longer just participating in the conversation. She's emotionally present in it. This is the difference between casual interaction and meaningful connection. One is driven by convenience. The other is shaped by intention. And if you can recognize that difference, if you can respond to it without disrupting it, you become part of the reason it grows instead of the reason it fades. Because in the end, it's not about how much she says, it's about how much meaning she places behind every word. It never starts with a direct statement. She's not going to sit there and say, "I see you in my future." That would require a level of certainty and vulnerability that her mind isn't ready to fully expose yet. Instead, it appears in fragments, in passing comments, in ideas that seem casual on the surface, but carry something much deeper underneath. You'll hear it in the way she speaks about experiences that haven't happened. "You'd probably like that place," or "that sounds like something we'd enjoy." Small sentences, almost effortless. But if you listen closely, there's a pattern forming. She's no longer speaking as an individual. She's beginning to think in terms of we, even if she disguises it as something hypothetical. And that's where the psychology becomes powerful. Because before people consciously accept their feelings, their mind often rehearses them. It tests possibilities in a safe, low-risk way. By placing you into these imagined scenarios, she's exploring what it would feel like to share moments with you, without having to fully commit to that reality yet. It's emotional experimentation, guided by curiosity and a growing sense of attachment. This is not something she's always aware of. It's subtle, almost automatic. Her brain is trying to reduce uncertainty, trying to understand where you might fit into her life. And instead of asking directly, it builds these quiet, what-if situations, where your presence feels natural, unforced, almost expected. But here's where most people miss the depth of it. They treat these moments like casual conversation. They respond without recognizing the underlying meaning, or worse, they ignore it completely. And when that happens, something important gets lost. Not because the words were significant on their own, but because of what they represented. Because when she includes you in her future thinking, even in a light or playful way, she's opening a door. A small one, yes, but a meaningful one. She's allowing you to step into a space that goes beyond the present moment. And how you respond to that determines whether that door stays open or quietly closes. If you dismiss it or fail to engage with it, her mind registers that. Not consciously, not as a clear judgment, but as a subtle signal. Maybe this connection isn't as aligned as it feels. But if you meet it with awareness, if you step into that imagined space with her naturally, without forcing it, you reinforce the idea that this we she's beginning to imagine might actually make sense. And this is where mindset plays a crucial role. You can't approach these moments with fear or overexcitement. If you react too strongly, you create pressure. If you ignore it, you create distance. The balance lies in presence, in acknowledging the moment without turning it into something heavy. Because what she's really looking for isn't a grand response. She's looking for emotional alignment, a sense that when she extends these small future-oriented thoughts, you don't resist them and you don't overwhelm them. You simply meet them, calmly, confidently, as if it's the most natural thing in the world. And that's what creates comfort. That's what allows her mind to move from hypothetical to real. Because once those imagined scenarios start to feel safe, they slowly stop being what ifs and start becoming desires. And when that shift happens, her behavior changes again, not dramatically, but in ways that reflect a deeper level of emotional investment. She may begin to reference those same ideas again, this time with a little more clarity. The hypotheticals become slightly more defined. The maybe someday starts to feel like this could actually happen. And all of it traces back to those early moments where she first tested the idea of including you in her future. This is how attraction evolves beneath the surface. Not through declarations, not through obvious signs, but through a gradual shift in perspective. From me to we, from present to possibility, from uncertainty to quiet emotional acceptance. And if you understand this process, you stop waiting for clear confirmation. You start recognizing the subtle invitations hidden inside everyday words. You start seeing the connection not as something you have to force or define, but as something that reveals itself over time, through patterns, through consistency, through the way two people slowly begin to align without even realizing it. Because in the end, the future is never introduced all at once. It's suggested one sentence at a time. It doesn't happen all at once. She won't suddenly sit down and reveal everything about herself, exposing her deepest fears and emotions in a single moment. That's not how real vulnerability works, especially when feelings are still forming. Instead, it comes in fragments. Controlled, measured, almost calculated, but not in a manipulative way. In a protective way. At first, it might be something small. A brief mention of a past experience, a subtle hint about something that once hurt her, or a quiet admission of a personal insecurity. It may seem insignificant, easy to overlook, but it's not, because what she's actually doing is testing emotional safety. Yours. Every piece of vulnerability she shares is like a signal, a question hidden beneath the surface. What will you do with this? Will you listen or will you dismiss it? Will you understand or will you judge? Will you hold it carefully or will you treat it like it doesn't matter? And the way you respond doesn't just affect that moment, it shapes everything that comes after it. Because when a woman is developing feelings, vulnerability becomes a risk she can't ignore. The more she feels, the more there is to lose. So instead of opening up fully, she gives you access in stages. She allows you to see just enough to evaluate whether you deserve to see more. And here's where most people misunderstand the process. They think vulnerability is about the content, what she shares. But it's not. It's about the act itself. The fact that she chose to share anything at all is the real signal. It means, on some level, she sees potential in you, enough to take a small emotional risk. But that risk is fragile. If it's mishandled, even in subtle ways, she won't always confront it directly. She won't say, I feel unsafe opening up to you. Instead, she'll simply stop. The depth will disappear. The conversations will return to the surface. And you'll be left wondering what changed, without realizing that it was your response or lack of awareness that quietly shifted the dynamic. This is why emotional presence matters more than perfect words. You don't need to have the right response. You don't need to fix her problems or offer solutions. In fact, trying too hard to fix things can sometimes create distance because it shifts the focus away from understanding and into control. What she's actually looking for is something much simpler, yet much rarer: genuine attentiveness. The ability to listen without interrupting, to acknowledge without minimizing, to respond without turning her vulnerability into something trivial or uncomfortable. These are the moments where trust is built, not through grand gestures, but through quiet consistency. And there's another layer to this that most people never notice. When she shares something personal, she's not just observing your words, she's observing your energy, your tone, your body language, your level of engagement. Do you seem present or distracted? Do you lean into the moment or pull away from it? Because communication is never just verbal. It's emotional, psychological, almost instinctive. And when she feels that you're truly present, something inside her shifts. The need to hold back begins to fade. The controlled vulnerability starts to expand. What was once shared in fragments begins to flow more naturally, more openly. Not because she decided to trust you in a single moment, but because your consistent responses made it feel safe to do so over time. But this only happens if your mindset is aligned with patience and awareness. If you rush the process, expecting deeper openness too quickly, you create pressure. And pressure is the fastest way to shut vulnerability down, because it turns something natural into something forced. Instead, you have to understand that emotional connection is built in layers. Each moment of vulnerability is a step, not a destination. And your role isn't to accelerate it, it's to respect it. To meet it with calmness, with steadiness, with a sense of quiet confidence that doesn't demand more than what's being given. Because when she feels that, she doesn't just open up more, she begins to associate you with safety. And that's one of the strongest psychological foundations of attraction. Not excitement, not intensity, but safety. The feeling that she can be seen without being judged, heard without being dismissed. And once that foundation is in place, everything else deepens naturally. The connection becomes stronger, more real, more grounded. Not because of what was said, but because of how it was received. Because in the end, vulnerability isn't about revealing everything, it's about revealing something and seeing if it's handled with care. It starts so subtly that most people don't even notice it. The rhythm of your conversations begins to align. The tone feels familiar, almost effortless, as if you're both moving in the same emotional direction without trying. She laughs a little more at your humor, matches your pace, responds with a similar energy. On the surface, it feels natural, almost coincidental. But underneath, something much deeper is happening. She's mirroring you. Now, mirroring is a natural human behavior. People do it unconsciously when they feel comfortable or connected. But when a woman is developing real feelings, this mirroring evolves into something more refined, more intentional, without her even realizing it. She doesn't just reflect your energy, she enhances it. If you're calm, she becomes softer, more receptive. If you're playful, she doesn't just laugh. She adds to the moment, amplifies it, extends it. If you show interest, she responds with just a little more enthusiasm than expected, as if she's trying to meet you where you are, and then gently pull the connection forward. This isn't imitation, it's alignment. And that alignment is one of the clearest psychological signals of growing attraction, because her mind is subconsciously trying to create harmony between you and her. It's adjusting, fine-tuning, shaping her responses in a way that makes the interaction feel smooth, effortless, almost magnetic. But here's where it gets deeper. This behavior isn't just about connection, it's about emotional synchronization. Her brain is responding to yours, picking up on cues, adapting in real time. And the more consistent your energy is, the easier it becomes for her to align with it. That's why your mindset matters more than anything else.